Our speaker tonight is Lee Habeeb. Mr. Habeeb is Vice President of Content at Salem Media Group, which syndicates national talk shows hosted by Hugh Hewitt, Dennis Prager, Larry Elder, Sebastian Gorka, Mike Gallagher, and Eric Metaxas. A University of Virginia School of Law graduate, Mr. Habeeb is the founder of American Private Radio and host of its storytelling show, Our American Stories, a weekday radio show syndicated across the United States. He is a weekly columnist for Newsweek, and he has written for numerous other publications, including National Review, The Federalist, and LifeZette. He is speaking this evening about understanding America through its stories. Please join me in welcoming Lee Habeeb.
Thank you so much. And before I start on the formal presentation, just a story, because the power of story is what we're going to really be talking about today. I have a daughter who in the 7th grade was about to go into the 8th grade, and she had a boyfriend. The boyfriend was someone she went to get ice cream with, that was it, with adult supervision. And he was going into high school. And so one day, it was Saturday, it was the day she would go to get ice cream, and I would sit at the corner. And she said, "Dad, I don't feel like getting ice cream today. Why don't we go to the movies?" And I'm thinking, what's going on, sweetheart? She goes, I'm not going out with my boyfriend anymore. I said, why not? She goes, I broke up. I said, well, why did you break up with him? She goes, well, he's going to high school, and he's going to go there, and he's just going to break up with me, so I broke up with him first. So this is a preemptive breakup. And so I thought, and I did this in front of my wife, and every once in a while when I'm telling stories in front of my wife says, as husbands here can attest, what are you thinking? But I shared some of my life experience. I said, sweetheart, when I was a junior, my girlfriend was a senior, and she was going off to Rutgers, and I was really afraid. And so I preemptively broke up with her. One Saturday night, I said to my dad, "Dad, let's go to the movies." And my father said, "What's up, son?" And we had the identical conversation. Only when I told my dad I had preemptively broken up with my girlfriend, he said, "You're such a loser. I'm not going out to the movies." So now I felt terrible. So I called up Don Sigapi. I remember it like it's yesterday. I was crying. I said, "Don, I'm so sorry. I love you. I was just so afraid you were going to go off to college and break up with me. Would you take me back?" And she did. And so my little girl said, "Well, what happened next, Dad?" I said, "Well, she went to Rutgers and dumped me." Not sure why I told you that story, but figured I'd share it. So to start any talk on storytelling, it's best to start with Plato. "Those who tell the stories rule society," he said. He was right then, and he's right now. We know that the most important book ever written in world history, and the biggest blockbuster of all time, the Bible, is nothing but an endless series of stories. And some pretty damn good ones. Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, the prodigal son. And some people think the O.J. trial may have been the trial of the century. But the trial of Jesus Christ before the Sanhedrin may have been the most important in world history. The fact is, the 4 Gospels and their parables transformed history and changed the world. Indeed, that's what's so powerful about the Bible when you think about it. Human beings across the globe have for centuries been stepping into those stories and seeing ourselves in them. For me, it was the story of Jonah that had the most meaning in my life. We all have at least one story we can point to in the Bible that draws us closer to God and to each other. Stories shape reality in human beings, explained the great Brooklyn novelist Paul Auster, and the poet Muriel Rukeyser famously said these words, "The world is made up of stories, not atoms." If they are all correct, why don't we who care about our nation's story take the business of storytelling more seriously? It's odd because we take the business of every other business in American life seriously, except the most important one. The left has invested vast fortunes in storytelling pipelines and filled them with stories that shape what Americans think about everything. Business, family, government, capitalism, our history, even God. To understand how we let this happen, we must first understand why we let it happen. First, we really don't think storytelling matters. How do I know? How many of us would be happy if a child of ours told us they wanted to be an actor or a writer? Now, if that same child told us they wanted to join the Marine Corps, I know how we'd react. We'd be proud. At NYU's Tisch School of the Arts a few years ago, Robert De Niro gave the commencement speech. He told a few jokes about his craft, and then he got serious. He implored the graduates to work hard and be fearless. He reminded them that they're part of an important tribe called artists, and that their work matters and shapes the life of their country. De Niro spoke to them like they were new army recruits. That's because the left views careers in the arts the way we view careers in the military and business. They believe in this stuff. We don't. Here's the second reason we failed up till now. Rather than invest in storytelling, we've spent billions of dollars on think tanks over the past few decades, on public policy research. Those PhDs in their work serve a vital role, no doubt. But do we believe white papers and op-eds can change the country? That facts, debate, and our superior arguments alone can change the narrative of a country? When we do spend money on media, we pour billions into political ads every election cycle. What do we have to show for it? Like I said, what do we have? It's actually tragic, because if you think about this, the people who are getting these advertising dollars, Comcast, Disney, are the very people who use our advertising dollars to funnel Jimmy Kimmel's show and pay for all the entertainment that attacks us, or actually funding our enemies' platforms. No disrespect, but asking PhDs and politicians to change the culture is like asking an NFL linebacker like Clay Matthews to be a ballerina. Rather than do what we naturally do in any other business, which is compete, we have chosen an interesting alternative and an unattractive one: whining. And by the way, we whine endlessly about Hollywood, media bias, and to be fair, we have a lot to whine about. When's the last time you saw a businessman cast as the good guy and a bureaucrat as the bad guy on a TV show? Or a good guy priest and a bad guy union boss in a movie? A long time ago, actually. It was Rod Steiger playing the corrupt union boss, and Karl Malden, the heroic priest, in Elia Kazan's 1954 masterpiece, On the Waterfront. Remember the scene where the dock worker is killed by union goons for testifying against their bosses? And there's Father Barry in that boat calling out the bad guys. One thug threw a can at the father's head. Another yelled, "Go back to your church, Father." He yells back, "This is my church." It made our hair stand up on our heads, our bodies. It was so beautiful. So why do stories move people in ways facts and arguments can't? It's simple. Human beings are hardwired to absorb the narrative form. Stories have structure, characters, plot, themes, and emotion, all of which reflect life. Stories change hearts, they change minds, they change everything. That's why it is easy for me to assert that storytelling is the world's oldest and best killer app. And stories live in the hearts and minds of people long after they're told. Take Arthur Miller's plays, which revolve mostly around father-son relationships. But always there's that scene that hammers capitalism, like the one in Death of a Salesman, where Willie Loman begs for his job while his boss plays with a machine on his desk. Miller wrote that play in 1949. He died in 2006. People are still moved by that story. The power that media ownership confers to the left on the storytelling front is profound, and the biggest advantage is this: they choose the stories that get told, but much more important, they choose the stories that don't get told. That curation power affects outcomes. If artists want their stories chosen, they'd best comport with the curator's worldview, which drives artists to censor themselves without even knowing it, because they need the work. That's why so many artists are liberal. Their bosses are. Another power of media ownership is its asymmetric nature. A handful of owners make the majority of us feel as if we're minorities in our own country. It's why dictators always seize the media, because what they're seizing is their nation's story. Sadly, the left just did that, but not by force. We just kind of let them. Back in 2004, the author Louisa Lim visited 4 Beijing universities. What would happen, he wondered, when he showed students a photo of Tank Man? Would they recognize it? You know the iconic picture. The lone man, 2 shopping bags in hand, standing in front of a line of tanks in defiance of the crackdown by the Chinese government at Tiananmen Square in 1989. It turned out that only 15% of the Beijing students recognized the picture. That wasn't an accident. As Lim explained in his book, The People's Republic of Amnesia, Tiananmen Revisited, the Chinese authorities were determined to blot out public memory of the protests. George Orwell knew why. He said this: the most effective way to destroy a people is to obliterate their understanding of their own history. In America, we have a different problem. Many on the left who don't care for America, capitalism, or the Constitution work hard to promote the most shameful aspects of our story, while erasing from public memory our most positive aspects. It's China in reverse, and a very different kind of amnesia is setting in. We conservatives own a few media platforms, Fox News, talk radio, some websites, but it's mostly news and opinion. It's programming designed to feed the choir and to preach to the choir, not grow it. We've invested little in storytelling platforms that will attract new fans to this great brand called America. And we're the business people? We're the smart guys? In spoken word formats, the storytelling elephant in the room is NPR. They have 30 million people listening and $350 million in annual revenue, with only 10% coming from the government. NPR also dominates the podcast world, with 5 of the top 10 podcasts in the country. Several years ago, with the help of some national donors and Hillsdale College, a team of storytellers got together to launch a nonprofit alternative to NPR and a daily 2-hour syndicated storytelling show, one that celebrates America and the events and people who made the country great. From the arts to sports and business to history, Our American Stories was designed to tell the story of America to Americans. Many of the stories revolve around character, resilience, and the power and persistence of imagination. This is a story about an improbable story about an author of America's songbook. Few people write as many hits. Fewer still write as many standards. Fewer still write songs that become part of our national identity. White Christmas and God Bless America, both of which this one man wrote, are a part of our cultural DNA. He did it without formal training. He couldn't read or write music and played almost entirely in the key of F sharp because it was easier for his untrained fingers to play the elevated, well-spaced black keys. He said this: the black keys are right under your fingers. The key of C is for people who study music. Irving Berlin's story is about many things: hard work, adversity, creativity, but America itself. He was born Israel Berlin in Russia in 1888, one of 8 children, and son to a cantor in the local synagogue. His family fled Russia after their village was destroyed in an anti-Semitic pogrom. Berlin's only memory was of his father, quote, lying in a blanket by the side of a road, watching his house burn to the ground. His family settled in New York, but there would be more tragedy to come in young Irving's life. None was worse than the loss of his father when he was 8. It was at a job waiting tables to support his family that he discovered a particular talent. His tips skyrocketed when he hummed songs of the day. Singing at tables soon turned into a lifetime of songwriting. In 1911, his Alexander's Ragtime Band climbed to number 2 on the Billboard charts. But ragtime wasn't his thing. He wanted to create his own version of American music, something romantic that appealed to the masses. He did just that. He wrote over 1,500 songs. He told his biographer he didn't believe in inspiration and that his most successful compositions were the result of hard work. One of his successes started as a failure. Berlin wrote God Bless America originally in 1918 while serving in the army, but he couldn't find a buyer. In 1938, as Hitler was rising to power, Berlin pulled that song out of his drawer. Kate Smith recorded it, and the rest was history. Berlin's daughter wrote that her father meant every word of that song. Quote, it was the land he loved. It was his home sweet home. He, the immigrant who made good, was saying thank you to his country. Writing one anthem would be enough for any mortal. But in 1941, Berlin wrote another, White Christmas.
which would sell 50 million copies for Bing Crosby and become the best-selling single of all time and one of the world's most beloved Christmas songs. Those two anthems may be the most compelling aspect of Berlin's legacy. A Jew wrote White Christmas, and a Russian wrote God Bless America, and he was the same damn guy. Only in America is such a thing possible, folks. Only in America is Irving Berlin's life possible. He died at the age of 101, a wealthy man, in large part because he owned his own publishing catalog. America's artists, Berlin included, owe a debt of gratitude to our nation's founders, who secured not just property rights, but intellectual property too, and the freedom to write about anything without recourse from their own government. It is why American artists are the most prolific in the world, because they're the freest in the world and live in a place where their ideas are protected too, and by our nation's founder in the Constitution itself, Article 1. The next story is about that founder, because it wasn't any founder who wanted to protect ideas. He was a founder who worked hard to protect ideas through something called a patent, because he was himself an inventor, a writer, and a publisher. Benjamin Franklin understood the power of ideas. More importantly, he understood the value of ideas. He became a very rich man from Poor Richard's Almanac. The story reflects a deep division, the one I'm about to tell you, within our not yet formed country. A division that split not just fellow countrymen, but families too. And the consequences for choosing a side in this division was not simply a tweet storm or a Facebook post. Quote, "An awful silence pervaded the House as we were called up one after another to the table of the President of Congress, Benjamin Rush said, to sign what was believed by many at the time to be our own death warrant. Rush was right. The British government considered the Declaration of Independence a treasonous document, and treason was a capital crime. How divided was America? One look at Benjamin Franklin's family tells the story. The printer, inventor, writer, and diplomat was a driving force of the American Enlightenment, but his own home was torn apart by our first Civil War. Franklin's son, William, was illegitimate, but he had all the advantages that any other boy in this world could want. Throughout their lives, father and son were extremely close. Franklin even used his influence to secure his son the royal governorship of New Jersey. Neither man could have imagined they'd one day be forced to choose between king and country. The father joined the cause of the Patriots late and urged his son to join him. William insisted that Dad join the Loyalists. That choice led to the son's arrest and a 2-year stint in the worst prison in America, the Litchfield Gaol in Connecticut. Quote, "It was a destination of last resort for outlaws condemned to be hanged, convicted murderers, reprobates, and traitors," wrote historian David Epstein. After his release from prison, William emigrated to England, never to return home. A few years before his death, Ben Franklin received a letter from his son, who was hoping for a chance at reconciliation. The father wrote back promptly, and imagine getting this kind of a letter from your dad, quote, "Nothing has hurt me so much, son, and affected me with such keen sensation as to find myself deserted in my old age by my only son. And not only deserted, but to find him taking up arms against me in a cause wherein my good fame, fortune, and life were all at stake." That was it. The two men would never reconcile. Franklin died a wealthy man. He left his son nothing. The political divide today is still about power in a distant city. But that distant city isn't London. It's Washington, D.C. It's a fight we've been having since our founding. Fights about power, fights about sovereignty. That last story was situated in the 18th century. This next is about one of America's great 20th century leaders, Martin Luther King. His Christian faith was an animating force in his life, as was the book he dedicated his life study to, the Bible. Bill Maher, the comedian, once described the Bible as a book most Christians don't actually read. He said this, "It's like a software license. Christians scroll down to the bottom and click, I agree." Martin Luther King thought differently. The Bible wasn't a software license. It was software code, a deep, mysterious code authored by a God for man's eternal purposes. Indeed, he found the Bible so compelling, King, so relevant in the 20th century, that his undergraduate degree and PhD were both in Bible studies. Leaving God out of Martin Luther King's life story and the Bible is like leaving automobiles out of Henry Ford's life, or hamburgers out of Ray Kroc's. But that's precisely what the media does at every turn, every year, when they celebrate his life. Take the last night of King's life. As he headed into Memphis in 1968, he knew he was in danger. Quote, "There's no way you can keep somebody from killing you," he told reporters, "if they really want to kill you." Bomb threats delayed his flight into Memphis that night, and though King was troubled, he told supporters, quote, "I'd rather be dead than afraid." Then came his speech at the Mason Temple the night of April 3rd. It was as if the 39-year-old knew his life would soon end. A major theme of that speech was fear. And by the way, is it not a major theme of the Bible? The other was the story, the Good Samaritan, a parable told by Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. King told the audience about a trip he and his wife made along the Jericho Road and why he thought two men passed a stranger in need and why one didn't. Quote, and this is from the sermon directly, "It's a winding, meandering, dangerous road, conducive to ambushing," he told the audience. "And you know, it's possible that the priest and the Levite looked over at that man on the ground and wondered if the robbers were still around. Or it's possible they felt the man on the ground was acting like he'd been robbed and hurt in order to lure them there for easy seizure. And so the first question Levite asked was, as I stopped to help this man, what will happen to me? Then the Good Samaritan came by and he reversed the question. If I don't stop to help this man, what will happen to him? That's the question before you tonight," King preached. A few minutes later, the speech, which had by now turned into a sermon, started its prophetic turn. Like anybody, he said, I'd like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will, King told the spellbound audience. He's allowed me to go up to the mountaintop, and I've looked over it, and I've seen the promised land, and I may not get there with you. But I want you to know tonight that as we a people will, in the end, finally, we will get to the promised land. On the eve of April 4th, not long before he was gunned down at the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, King's last words were to a musician named Ben Branch, who was scheduled to perform at an event later on that night. Ben, he said, make sure you play Take My Hand, Precious Lord. Play it real slow. Play it pretty. The enduring truth of this story, one the media cannot rewrite, is this. Martin Luther King's desire to serve the God he loved changed forever the country he loved. This last story that I'm about to tell you is a story of a city and a disaster, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, and the even more remarkable story of the Great Chicago Recovery. Experts disagree on how that fire started. Some say it was a cow, others say it was vandals. But everyone agrees on why the fire started. It was Chicago's remarkable growth. In 1840, the city had a mere 4,500 residents. 10 years later, it passed the 30,000 mark. By 1860, it had grown to 100,000. And by 1870, 300,000. What led to all that growth? As the saying goes, location, location, location. Chicago was near the center of the country, near where the waterways and railways met. It was a perfect place for anything and anyone to get anywhere. Timing also played a part. America was going through a transformation from a rural power to an industrial power. But how did all of that growth, all of that life, lead to a near-death experience? As a Chicago historian explained, Chicago had to build quickly, so they built it all out of wood. It was quick and easy and cheap. Mother Nature played her part too. A meteorologist, Tom Skilling, said, quote, it was an exceedingly dry summer and fall. Worse still, winter was approaching, and those wood houses were filled with firewood. The Chicago fire, it turns out, wasn't just predictable. It was inevitable. It started out on the west side and quickly roared out of control, a steady wind propelling the inferno from block to block and even across the Chicago River. 30 hours later, the fire finally ran out of fuel because there was nothing left to burn. The fire claimed nearly 300 lives, a third of the city lay in ruins, and 100,000 people were homeless. Most of the hotels, stores, and banks were destroyed. By the way, that's State Street. A picture in a second will show you that same shot, same angle, 20 years later. What happened next revealed the character of the city and the nation. There was no FEMA back then, no Illinois Emergency Management, no one to blame, no one to sue, and no appetite for victimhood. Even before the bricks stopped smoking, the city's leaders were planning a comeback. The Reverend Robert Collier told his congregation these words: "We have not lost our geography. Nature called the lakes, the forests, and the prairies together in convention long before we were born, and they have decided that on this spot a great city would be rebuilt." Within 48 hours, 12 of the 29 banks that burned down were operating in makeshift facilities to get money to customers. Bankers got busy raising capital. One sent letters to bankers all over the globe urging them to invest and loan money to the great people of Chicago. Chicago was rebuilt at an unimaginable pace. By 1880, its population reached 500,000. And by 1890, it passed the 1 million mark, becoming the second biggest city in America. Same street, same camera angle. The people of Chicago did all of it without the help of the state or federal government. American optimism, resilience, character, and capitalism itself rebuilt the city. Folks, we must start telling the story of America to Americans. Stories about all that's good and decent and beautiful about this country. We must address matters of the heart, too. Not talking about love is where we all go wrong, because it's love that builds a city. We must tell stories about faith, too, and the beautiful things we do because of our faith. America is unimaginable without it. Because the battle lines in America are not just between left and right. In the end, they're between up versus down, and that is the material world versus the spiritual world. Folks, to continue to let the left alone tell the story of America isn't just gross negligence, it's cultural suicide. We have great stories to tell. Let's start telling them. How hard can it be? After all, liberals do it. That's all, folks. Sure.
Thank you. It's a wonderful thing that you're doing.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
But let me tell you as a writer what the difficulties are. Editors, publishers are looking for a certain point of view, and it's hard to even get through the front door. Now, I was a nationally syndicated columnist in 122 papers. The generation of today, of course I was a different generation, doesn't want to talk to me because of my point of view. The grants that you try to go for as far as the internships, the money that even the government gives, has a different point of view. The newspapers are owned, the media. Why aren't we buying them? Why aren't we spending money in order to create our own market as far as storytelling is concerned? So those are just some of the things that I would like you to address if you have any ideas.
I'd be happy to, and I think look, Laura Ingram and I went to law school with Laura Ingram and started her national show. In 1996, we got hired by MSNBC, believe it or not, to do a TV show on MSNBC, back when nobody was watching it, and they pretended not to be liberal. Only I was stuck in Secaucus, New Jersey all day, and it was miserable, and everybody was liberal. But there was a show in the morning called The Don Imus Show, and Laura and I learned a lot about radio when we got into radio. But in 1996, 15-year head start, CNN had a guy named Roger Ailes, got together with a billionaire named Rupert Murdoch, and they decided to slide a lot of money up to the table and say, let's compete. And they competed, and Fox News won. And I've seen it happen again and again. Let's take a film director that I think we all know and love, Clint Eastwood. Since 1991, Clint Eastwood has done 22 or 23 movies, I'm not sure of which. 8 have been #1 or #2, and over $1 billion in the box office. He has total creative control of his movies, and well, why not? They make money.
I think we're getting to a place now where a lot of our donors and investors who spent a lot of money on political ads and a lot of money in other places are now starting to think hard about storytelling. And the good news is that the barrier to entry are much lower than they used to be. Much lower than they used to be. And there's just tremendous demand. I mean, that every Clint Eastwood movie is #1 or #2. Think about The Unforgiven. Think about Gran Torino. I mean, there was a movie with a Catholic priest who was trying to do good, trying to influence the old craggy bastard, right? And you would have thought he was incorrigible, except what does he do? These total strangers who he didn't like, who he insulted routinely, he ended up loving, willing his perfect heart to. And in an act of self-sacrifice, gets himself shot to free that family from thugs and gangsters. It was a beautiful movie. And Americans are craving for it. And our capitalists just have to start stepping up to the plate and putting the money up. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. Because one success can beget more successes. Moreover, I'll leave you with this. One of the things that's missing is executive talent. There are 2 publicly traded companies in America that are run by conservatives, Fox News and Salem Media Group. And I'm a VP of content at Salem Media Group. If and when I decide to leave that position, a very nice paying position, that position will be filled, and guess how many other jobs are out there for me in media land? None. I leave Disney and I'm a liberal and I go to start my own thing. There's 25 other jobs if I decide to drop back in. So I think these are things we know we have to address, and we're about to start addressing them. I got so tired of complaining and whining about it that I went ahead and talked to some capitalists, and they liked the idea, gave us some money and said go at it. So I think this is more about us not complaining anymore, not whining about our circumstance. I mean, goodness, Washington looked out into the Brooklyn Harbor and saw an armada coming at it. Slightly more difficult problem, right? So I just think that the word Stockholm Syndrome always interested me because, my wife had been sexually abused for 6 years. And I said to her, why didn't you leave? And she said, you just don't. You start to identify with the captor gets in your head, and pretty soon you're stuck. And the real power of the media is that we're all in this sort of Stockholm Syndrome-like effect. We keep seeing the media coming at us and we think it's hopeless. Meanwhile, we keep winning elections. We heard that Barack Obama had Google and he had Facebook, and that the ascendancy of the digital social revolution would lead to a Democratic hegemony, and the Tea Party came in and swept the deck. Reagan had nobody rooting for him when there was just NBC, ABC, and CBS. They were all rooting against him. There was no Fox News. There was no Drudge. There was no nothing. He won 49 states in his second race. So the American people just need to be fed. And I think we're trying to prove that with our proposition. But I know the problem. I experienced it a good deal in my life in the 1990s when Laura and I were trying to start. There was no talk radio. I mean, there was maybe one talk station in every 5th market. And it wasn't until 2001 when we got nationally syndicated, Hannity got syndicated, Bennett got syndicated. And suddenly, there was a lot of content, and so suddenly there were a lot of talk stations to park that content. And by the way, you want to talk about a conservative dial, there's 45 million people listen to conservative talk radio. And it has made all the difference in the world. We have come to dominate talk radio in a way that no liberal, no leftist could have imagined. I remember, and I'm sure all you do, the first time you heard that cry of Rush Limbaugh. You went, that's me. Finally, someone's talking to me, my language. So if we make the movies that people want, they'll come. I have no question if we build it, they'll come. Next question.
What's your greatest source of hope?
God. Malcolm Gladwell was on Laura's show, and she's always asking me for questions because we love to get the authors comfortable, and then we ask them a zinger. And, well, we had a zinger for Malcolm because, of course, when he was writing his book about David and Goliath, he told a really great story. And he talked about how David had prepared for years with those 5 smooth stones, and how Goliath was a stumbling adversary, and that David had all the advantages and Goliath didn't, because the new game was about speed, not about size. You think David knew any of that? You think David got there and won that battle just because of all that preparation? So she let Malcolm opine and opine, but Malcolm had left one thing out of his book. David had God on his side. And he knew it. This helps. So God gives me hope. And going on campuses actually gives me hope. I live in Oxford, Mississippi. That's where we do our show. And I see young people battling back in their own ways, often just through just one of these, to the campus protesters. And I think sometimes we give the campus protesters a little too much credit. I don't like what's happening at our campuses, but our young people are smart. Look, I found Ronald Reagan, I got to him, that was my first vote. Everybody told me, oh, young people won't vote for Reagan. They won't vote for him, he's old. What were we told? He was going to push Nana off the cliff. He was going to get us into a nuclear war. He was an actor. He was an idiot. He was lazy. I mean, the prevailing theme about Reagan was that he was going to lose and nobody was going to vote for him. Meanwhile, I voted for him. Laura Ingraham voted for him. Dinesh, every young person I know voted for him. Because Jimmy Carter was saying the following: America's best days are behind us. Put on a sweater and lower your thermostat. And I thought, that's I'm going with the old guy who says our best days are ahead. And by the way, let me tell you about the old days. Because we're a great country. We're a great people. And so I think half of our problem is us. We walk around acting as if we're losing when we're winning. And we act like we have no hope. And this is what the left does and their media control does best of all. And look, and if you believe that there's a God and there's a Satan, Satan wants to steal your joy and make you angry. So when we're angry, we're working on behalf of the left. When we're loving, when we're reaching out, when we're telling stories, when we're reaching out to our neighbors, there's a delight. Once a year, I'll tell you a quick story. Once a year, there's this Lebanese professor at Ole Miss who invites me in. So I get to speak to 500 kids. The faculty goes crazy. He doesn't care if he's tenured. He's a Christian and he's a conservative. He goes, Habeeb, do what you do. So I get 500 kids in a room, and I do something pretty interesting. I tell everybody to close their eyes. I say, how many of you believe in the thing called love? Even though it's not provable, even though no scientist can measure it, how many of you believe in a thing called love? Every single hand goes up. And by the way, I don't have the look, and I film it. And so now I say, keep your eyes closed. How many of you, if you met the proper person in your life, and it was your soulmate, or someone you really thought you could spend the rest of your life with, how many would you want to get married? Almost all the hands stayed up. He's still my heart. Almost total agreement. All these kids from different walks of life, all different ideas in their head. And I keep going, how many of you want to have children if you found that dream person? Almost all the hands stayed up. And maybe they'd want to have them later. That's beside the point. So then I keep their heads down and their eyes closed. I said, now how many of you, if you had two children, one did their homework, one did all their work, one who was dutiful, and then you had another who didn't do anything, stayed in the room, played loud music, and just played video games and didn't do any chores, how many of you would give them the same allowance? Not a single hand. So then I said, raise your hands. I said, let's play the video. Who said we don't agree on a lot of things? And then I asked some questions. Did you create inequality by giving one kid an allowance and one kid not? And is it a bad thing or a good thing? And I asked just a few more questions and left, and I had a line of like 300 kids going, could you teach here? And I didn't give them an answer, I just asked them a bunch of questions. And Chris Pachelder and I, Chris is on the board of APR, was telling me a story about watching Milton Friedman back when he was at the University of Michigan. And watching Milton Friedman on, of all places, the Phil Donahue show. Google it. Put up Phil Donahue and Milton Friedman. All Phil Donahue is doing is asking questions in a proper series. And Phil Donahue is like gesticulating. By the time 5 or 6 minutes passes, Phil Donahue doesn't know what to do with himself because he can't answer a series of very simple questions. So I have tremendous hope, not only for the country. We've got God on our side, we've got the Constitution on our side, we've got an amazing people. And I got to tell you this, we have immigration on our side. We told one story about a Chinese American who did a thought experiment. He was wondering how many Americans try to become Chinese citizens. So he said, what the heck, let me see what that would be like. So he goes through the process, and when he's going through the process, he discovers that not a single American that year had tried to become a Chinese citizen. So then he called some pals that he had because he had gone to some overseas fancy school. And it turns out they were doing the thought experiment too. There wasn't a person in Europe who tried to become a Chinese citizen. And at the end of this little sort of story that he told us, he said, you know, I'm so hopeful about America because we're great at creating Chinese Americans. But China is really bad at creating American Chinese. And this is true. And so this is our advantage. The world wants to come here. And I love it, the left says we're a racist nation, and yet all these dark-skinned immigrants are trying to come here, like my Lebanese and Sicilian parents. So their claims are false. They get us too angry. If we were a little more confident in our step, a little more confident in our walk, we do what Reagan always did. Because remember what Reagan did when they do what he did? He would just go, there you go again. Like he laughed it off. That's how confident he was in his views. He shrugged it off. And how humiliating for your opponent to just be laughed at. So very hopeful, always hopeful. I got God on my side. Any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned the old days. A lot of things that we like about America were there at the beginning, but that's not where they started. Is there ever a need to not just tell America's stories, but the stories that made America what it was?
Yeah, and we do, what we tend to do on our show is a mixture of things. So for every story we tell about George Washington, which we'll do, we'll tell a story about some young Venezuelan immigrant who left the oil patch of Venezuela. This particular gentleman left when Hugo Chavez consolidated the oil industry. And why he left was because the moment he consolidated the oil industry, Chavez's pals all got the jobs. And the competent people all left. Because, well, you know what happens when nepotism rules the day. Incompetence wins, competence is punished. So they said, what the heck, let's get out of here, let's go to the oil patch. And with no money to their name, he and his friends worked hard, cleaned fracking trucks, bought a couple of fracking trucks, and now run a multi-million-dollar business. And so connecting our past to our present, and why that happened, and he started to talk about property rights, he started to talk about capital, he started to talk about how a contract meant something. You know, these are things we take for granted, rule of law. You know, we play this piece, I think it's almost worth playing if I can find it. We do an hour on Justice Scalia's life every year. I mean, shame on us. What has the left done 9 documentaries by now on RBG? Or 10? I mean, there's another one that comes out every day. I walked out of Ole Miss, the one documentary that was being played there, because I wanted to see the reaction, to see what the professors did. They had about 1,000 people at a law school watch a documentary about Ginsburg. And as I walked out, I'm just talking to some of the students, a lot of undergrads, a lot of people in the community, and they were just so horrified when I asked them, hey, did you know that Ruth Bader Ginsburg wasn't the first female Supreme Court justice? They didn't know that. They estimated in this documentary, there was like one little passage, there was like one little picture of Sandra Day O'Connor, and that was it. And we did a story about Scalia in his own words, and not just about the Constitution. Right? I mean, he's spoken about so many things in so many places. And when people hear Scalia talk, it's just a remarkable thing. The most powerful thing on the day before he died, the day after he died, we asked people for their favorite Scalia stories. And this one gentleman who writes for the Acton Institute told this story about how he would go to church fairly regularly on a weekday afternoon in the same church near the court, Catholic church, that Scalia went to. And one day the church was pretty empty. He was standing in the back. Scalia didn't notice him. He didn't notice Scalia at first. But then he saw the justice, and he saw a woman walk up to the justice who looked, as he had said, like the kind of woman you'd avoid on the streets. Sores on her hands, open sores, homeless person, a troubled person, he said. And he said, and I watched Justice Scalia put his arm around her. I watched Justice Scalia stroke her arm. I watched him touch her, whisper words of reassurance and comfort to her for about 5 minutes. And then whatever he said did reassure her. It looked like he had given her a few dollars. Again, tapped her on the patch, rubbed her back, and sent her on her way, and then he went on his way. And he said, and then I saw a man, a beautiful man, who was honoring his God and doing it the way God commanded, which is to love a stranger. If we don't tell stories about this, not just the jurisprudence of Scalia, but the man, Scalia, we're doing a tremendous disservice. And while they prop up Ginsburg and we're silent with Scalia, we have ourselves to blame. So those are the kind of things we just love to do, and we like to connect our glorious past to the present. I don't know if any of you have seen the country music special by Ken Burns, but I urge all of you to see it. It's absolutely remarkable. And what you really feel as you get closer to country, and you can tell Burns had just discovered this thing called country music. If you recall, his first documentary on American music, and he's done maybe 20 by now, but his first one was on jazz, because he's a city guy. So he actually thought jazz was America's music, only it never was, because it never caught on, because it was too complex, too highbrow for the average American. No, country music and rock and roll with the American music. This is what America latched onto. This is what we exported to the world, and we're selling like crazy. And what was interesting about listening to the country musicians is they all had a deep respect and reverence for their predecessors. They all knew every Bill Monroe song. They all knew every Chet Atkins song. And yet they also wanted to take that country music, their predecessors' great art, and move it to another place. So both loving the formational character and necessity of what brought country to country, and yet how to make America our own. So we want to love George Washington, but we want to say that this is our country now. How do we take the principles of the Constitution, the rule of law, and apply it to our life? How do we create our culture? I don't think Christians particularly, and conservatives, are good enough in asserting our own cultural identity. We have simply had an identity by reaction to the adversary's identity, and our identity has become a reactionary identity. And that's a shame, because we have so much to believe in, and an identity that's so much richer than theirs. Theirs is basically, their stories are built on lies in the end, and ours are built on truth. And there was a last moment, Wynton Marsalis is sitting there talking about country music. And Wynton, believe it or not, this is crazy, but an African-American jazz composer and one of our best musicians is one of the regular people talking through this 8-hour country music special. And he starts to talk about Hank Williams. And he talks about what the song's about. He goes, listen to that lonely wilt in the voice. Listen to that pain. Listen to that suffering. My wife did me wrong. My husband did me wrong. I let my God down. I didn't let my God down. God, love, faith, fear. We black people, we're always singing about external stuff. Why aren't we talking about that too? We're all human beings. This is what Marsalis, condemning his own people and his own music for being superficial, for being external, and for not talking about our own personal sins and failings, which is what country music does better than any other musical idiom known to man. It's a confessional, most great country music, just a pure confessional. Most black music is a protest music. It says nothing about the person and their sins. It says, and questions other people's sins, which is what Wynton Marsalis thought made it empty music. Fascinating. One last question? Yes, ma'am.
So, can you tell us what the vision of our American stories was for you, where you're at today, and where you hope to be in the next 5 years?
Sure. About 5 years ago, I was on a conference call. Well, I accompanied Bill Bennett, who, of all the people I spent a lot of time with, Bill had the most impact on both me and Laura. Laura's first job was for Bill Bennett in the Reagan administration, writing speeches for Bill. And Bill just has a way of mentoring people and demanding that they read. Like, he wants us to read. And so I say, did you read that book? Did you read that book? And he makes you feel like an idiot. I mean, even if you read a lot of books, he has this routine ability to make you feel like a moron. But it's good. He doesn't do it condescendingly. He's challenging you all the time to read more. So he has this speech that is a typical stump speech. But on this particular day, Bill's really grumpy. So he's speaking to the Florida 100, like the movers and shakers of Florida. And he just goes off script. And he gives a talk about the American story and how we're losing the narrative. And I mean, it was just, he was not happy. By the way, the audience was mesmerized. But I'm sitting there, and every once in a while he's looking at me. Then the next day, what we call our Salem editorial meetings, which is when all the hosts and some outside writers join, Bill's at it again. Are we moving the needle? He kept asking us, especially some of the senior producers and vice presidents. Are we changing anything? Are we doing anything? What he was really saying was, are we bringing new people to the choir? Are we growing market share? And I think he knew the answer. We weren't. And in some ways, it was just about at that time when the chorus, the conservative chorus, was starting to pick at itself. So we weren't just growing the choir. We're actually sort of dividing and splitting up the choir. Rhinos, Tea Party. I mean, it was just getting to that point where we were killing each other. And so I took it personally. I really listened to him. And so the next day, I just thought, Phil, what's that all about? And he said, you know, what would This American Life, the NPR product, which he loved, he said, what would This American Life sound like if the people making it liked their country? It's a damn good question. And that was it for me. I went to Ed Atzinger, our CEO, the head of Salem. I said, look, boss, I'm going to have to quit the next year because I got this thing I want to do. And he said, don't quit. Run these shows. Just make this be another show. Go do what you do. Staff it up. It's a nonprofit. And I went to Leonard Leo, who's the founder of the Federalist Society. I share in the vision. I went to Dr. Orn, I share in the vision. And then I went to Bernie Marcus, the founder of Home Depot. And Phil Anschutz, a really remarkable Christian philanthropist. And they both gave the seed capital because they said, no, build that. Build it. So what we're doing now is building a 2-hour-a-day national storytelling show on radio, because that's still where the people are. And then ultimately one day it'll be podcasts. And what we hope to do is have built enough intellectual property, enough stories about all kinds of Americans, that one day we can go to a Netflix or somebody like it and say, hey, we've got hundreds and hundreds of hours of content We've got a whole lot of families. The stories have been written, and we'd like to just film them. I'd also love, the vision would be, to have a bunch of the people who work for me at one day in the future say, hey, I want to start my own show. I want to start my own thing. And then I will have done the best service to my donors, which is to train up a new generation of executives. Because this is a business, and we heard this in the country special all the time. Country music is business. If you don't sell records, then you don't have a career. And then if you don't go tour, you don't have a career. The left's really good at this. They take this business really seriously. And that's the plan, is to just go do something big and have a big cultural impact. We try not to be on talk radio stations. We want to be on country stations. We want to be on classic rock stations. And then when somebody hears the story of Henry Ford, they're going to go, my goodness, I did not know that he got wealthy lowering the price of cars. And that cars, which were hitherto not available to even kings 50 years ago, and then were only available to the rich, were now available to everybody. And when we explain capitalism that way, that nothing else can lower the price of something and make it better and cheaper than capitalism can, through competition, through free enterprise, and through, in the end, consumers choosing who wins and who loses, not by force, but by choice. And by the way, this resonates with people when I talk to kids in schools, and I talk to them about life as it is. One day I played a clip of Barack Obama, and Obama had said in 2009, what we need to do is take all the insurance companies, get rid of the profits of each one, get rid of the marketing in each one, fold them into one enterprise, and then we'll be more efficient. And I went, anybody here think there's a problem with what he just said? They didn't really flush it out. I said, now think about your own lives. Think about flat screen TVs. And I put a picture up of the first flat screen TV. And the first flat screen TV cost like $15,000. And it weighed like 8,000 pounds. And 3 rich guys had it. And it didn't work. And now, all I did was flash forward to flat screen TVs, how much better they got, how much lighter they got, and how much cheaper they got. So I said, now look at all the companies that are making flat screen TVs. There are a whole bunch of companies, some succeeded, some didn't. Let's look at potato chips. I took a picture of a potato chip aisle. Look at all those different potato chips. All the different profits, all the different marketing, all the different CEOs. What would the potato chip aisle look like if the federal government made one potato chip? The National Potato Chip Company. Do you think those would be good potato chips? Do you think they'd be cheap potato chips? What part of your life doesn't free markets work for? And by the way, this is astounding to them. Because I'm not telling you to be a Republican, I'm not telling you to be a Democrat. I try not to use the word capitalism, because it just means so many bad things. But when I just talk about freedom, and their own lives, and why they choose one restaurant and not another, and what would happen if there was one government restaurant? Oh, that's right, it's the commissary, and you don't eat there. Crummy food and high prices. So, I'm hopeful about all these things. We have God on our side, we have the right story on the side, we have the Constitution on our side, we have history on our side. We've just been really crummy at this thing called the media. And if we just dare to play in the space, we take 50% market share in 10 years. Because we got 50% of the country at least. And I actually think we get a lot of these centrist Democrats too, just as Trump has done. I think there are a lot more people who'd be hospitable to our ideas if they met us first through story rather than through a politician. One last question. Yep.
Maybe the answer is there's not a marketplace, and that's why it's done in NPR. I'm a music fanatic, and the kind of music that I'm fanatical about is Beethoven and Brahms and Wagner. Now, maybe there's just no market, and that's why NPR runs it. The tax that I pay for listening to my beautiful music all day is once an hour. I have to listen to 5 minutes of really increasingly disgusting talk again, and then every night at 7 o'clock I have to listen to an hour of it.
Yes.
But that's the tax. Is there a market for doing that, packaging that in another way, the people who love the country?
Well, I can tell you this. I grew up listening to opera because my father was Italian, and so Puccini played all the time. But I would bring my friends, and they'd sort of like Puccini, but then in came Bruce Springsteen, and it couldn't compete. So, and Irving Berlin said this best, because when he came, he said, look, I want to make classical American music. And I think in the end, our classical American music is Copland, and it's Dylan. And it just is. So I would say that classical jazz, NPR can afford it because it's subsidized. And then they can say it's educational. But some of the only places we now have classical music left on the dial, and I love it.
Sounds silly.
But it's almost gone, and only sort of a few elite neighborhoods have it. So it's mostly cities that play the classical music, and then the price you pay for having your classical music is having to listen to fresh air. And so I'm so sorry, because that's painful to listen to Terry Gross. And by the way, if you've noticed, NPR is just global warming now. I mean, it is just non-stop sustainability and LGBTQIA. I mean, it just never ends. Even Marketplace, which is supposed to be about the economy, is never about the economy. So you can't even make it up. But it is what it is. NPR is actually a ministry. It is a ministry, right? People are donating, and that's their church. And it's a secular ministry, a secular progressive ministry. And all we were trying to do here is go, oh, this will be a ministry. Our American Stories will be a pro-rule of law, pro-American ministry that loves free enterprise and God. And so my feeling has always been, as Bernie Marcus told me, and he's one of my heroes, he started Home Depot, he said it's so much easier to be Lowe's than Home Depot. The guy who comes out and builds the market goes out there, and then Lowe's just sits around and goes, let's just copy Home Depot and take 30% of their market share. Let's steal some of their executives and let's, poach some of their vendors. And so in the end, here's NPR doing something, and I'm just sitting there studying it going, what do they do right? Let's do it better. And let's just sort of reverse engineer the stuff they do and just do it better. So I'm very hopeful because innovators, disruptors, and entrepreneurs are just starting to enter into this space. And if I can inspire a few, that'll be even more important than making the content itself, is inspiring others to innovate in the space.
Thank you.
Thank you.